Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. We have many of you who have been here for about 3 days now, enjoying a lot of good information about Grand Canyon history. But we also do have a few new folks in the room, and that's another part of the story for this session. We do have several members of the Arizona section of the American Society of Civil Engineers who have joined us this afternoon. So I'll welcome those folks. I'll be saying a little bit more about American Society of Civil Engineers as I go through the course of the presentation this afternoon. So there are really two stories here. One is a story about the history and the significance of the Kaibab Trail Suspension Bridge, and the other part of the story is that that bridge is being designated by the American Society of Civil Engineers as a National Historic Civil Engineering Landmark. Oops. So thank you, everyone, for being here this afternoon. First, I need to tell you a little bit about myself. I know I was introduced this morning at a different session. I am a civil engineer, and I think that's a pretty important part of the story for this session, because that means I have a particular interest in things like infrastructure and the Black Bridge. And as was mentioned this morning, I did have the opportunity to live here at the Grand Canyon for 6 years. I want to say a little bit more about civil engineers. If you are a civil engineer, raise your hand. Okay, that's wonderful. So, what do civil engineers do? Well, I would like you to think about any kind of infrastructure. It might be this building that you are sitting in. It might be the roadway you traveled on to get here. It might be the pipeline that brings water from Roaring Springs to your faucet here in Grand Canyon Village. It could be an airport. It could be all kinds of things that you depend on every day. And what do civil engineers do? They plan, they design, they operate, they construct, they maintain, they manage those facilities through their entire life cycle, from conception to, I guess, when they wear out and we don't need them anymore. So we are a people-serving profession, and we impact everyone's life in many, many different ways through the work that we do. Now I want you to raise your hand if you have walked down the trail to the bottom of the Grand Canyon and walked across the Kaibab Trail Suspension Bridge. Because you are raising your hand, you are going to have a real appreciation about part of the story of the bridge, its design, and its construction, because you know how hard it is to get down there, and also how hard it is to get back. We are designating the bridge as a National Historic Civil Engineering Landmark a little bit later this afternoon. I do want to thank a number of people who have helped to make this a joint event. So I'll thank the Grand Canyon Historical Society, President Dave Mortensen in particular. I need to express thanks to Grand Canyon National Park. There have been multiple superintendents over the last, I'll say, many years that we've been working on this that have supported this designation. So thank you to those superintendents, and also to a number of staff in the park that have helped to make this a reality. And then I also want to ask a question. Let me ask, are there any members of the Havasupai tribe in the audience right now? Okay, I asked that question because the Havasupais had a little bit of a role in the construction of this bridge, and I'll mention that a little bit later. We're going to have this session at 3 o'clock this afternoon on the canyon rim. We're going to unveil a plaque dedicating the Black Bridge, that's the name it commonly goes by, as a National Historic Civil Engineering Landmark. That event is going to take place about 40 yards east of the Havasupai Geology Museum, and anyone in this room, everyone in this room, is welcome to attend that. And at the end of the session here, I'll give you some directions to make sure you know how to find that location. Anyone get Arizona Highways magazine and read it? Anyone see this story in the February issue? A story about the Black Bridge and the fact we're dedicating it today? If you haven't seen it, you might take a look at that. Yes, commonly referred to as the Black Bridge. Way down there in the bottom of the canyon, this is a wayside that is also out there near the Havasupai Geology Museum. And you can see this little inset pointing down to that little piece of river that you can actually see from the canyon rim where the bridge is located. And if you have hiked down the trail, you know that there are a lot of switchbacks, tight switchbacks. You go down, down, down as you're entering the inner gorge. You can appreciate that all the material on this bridge had to go down all of those switchbacks to get there. This bridge was constructed in 1928, and at the time, it was the only way to cross the Colorado River between Moab, Utah, and Needles, California. That's a distance of over 754 miles. And even today, if you want to ignore the other bridge that's a little ways downstream, it's still the only crossing of the river between Navajo Bridge and Hoover Dam. And I'll probably mention this again later, but it's really, really interesting. Both Navajo Bridge and Hoover Dam are other National Historic Civil Engineering landmarks. Well, before we had a bridge there, how did people get across the river? Well, Native Americans probably crossed the river somehow or other. Then the European Americans came. There were miners, prospectors, explorers. But if you needed to cross the river, maybe you had a boat to try to get across. About 15 miles west of here, back in the late 1800s, William Wallace Bass created a tourist camp, and he built a trail down to the river. And he had a little, very primitive homemade boat down at the bottom. And in 1903, surveyors from the U.S. Geological Survey were working on the Mathis-Evans map. This particular party was on the north side of the river. They were running short of food, so they assigned one of their party to come back across the river, go back up the South Bass Trail to Bass Camp, Bass's tourist camp, and seek some more provisions. Well, this USGS guy named Walker got to the river on the north side and found that Mr. Bass's boat was on the south side. And that wasn't going to work out very well. His only choice was to swim across the river. And Walker took off his clothes, put them on top of his head, and proceeded to swim across the river. Now, Walker did make it to the other side of the river, but his clothes didn't make it to the other side of the river. This was early April. It was cold outside. He needed to get up to 7,000 feet elevation. So he walked a couple miles to another little camp that Bass had, and he found an old blanket, and he found a burro named Brigham. And he rode that out. It was getting very late, and in fact, Ada Bass's diary says that there was a knock on the door in the middle of the night, and she opened the door, and here was this guy, stark naked, except for this old blanket wrapped around him, who had come up the trail on a burro or a mule named Brigham. I have no pictures of that event, but perhaps they looked something like this. Also, very early in that time, here are two guys who attempted to cross the river by boat. They both drowned. Wooden boats tended to dry out in the sun. They would shrink. They would deteriorate. Maybe this boat was not in very good condition, but for whatever reason, they happened to drown in their attempt to cross the river. Very shortly after that, Francois Mathis, who was surveying the canyon, decided that his crews should have a better kind of boat, and he actually ordered a two-piece steel boat that could be transported in two pieces by mule, and for his activities, he used a steel boat to get across the river. And this is an early picture taken by probably the Mathis group. This is looking upstream. This is the mouth of Bright Angel Creek. And lo and behold, there is no bridge across the river there, is there? But in 1908, I believe it was, David Rust, he had built a trail down from the North Rim, trying to promote tourism on the North Rim, a trail down from the North Rim to the river, and he realized things were going pretty well for tourism on the South Rim. He actually built a little tent camp at what is now Phantom Ranch, but he realized if he was going to be successful, there needed to be a way for folks to get across the river. So with much difficulty, only a few men, he rigged up this cableway to go across the river. And you see the steel cage there. Many of you have seen pictures of it earlier in the History Symposium. That was the first, I guess, physical way to get across the river. And you can go down there in current day. We're just going to fade into a current day picture taken from the same location. Go from that historic photo to a current day photo, and you can see the current day Black Bridge right in the background and near the north abutment of the cableway. He built his bridge across, the cableway across. He had to improve a trail to go up to the Tonto, sort of along the route of today's South Kaibab Trail, and then connect over to Cameron's Trail, or the Bright Angel Trail, over near Indian Garden. And here's a historic photo somewhere along what we would now call the Tonto Trail, advertising that this was the direction to go to reach what the sign calls an aerial tramway, and that is David Rust on the left. The first two passengers to go across, and I don't know if it's these two women in this photo, but the first two passengers to go across in the cage, the cableway, were women who had come down from the South Rim. The cage was damaged in a flood in 1917, and it's a little unclear if it was put back into use after that. Grand Canyon National Park was created in 1919, so that meant we were starting to develop the park to serve tourists and visitors. The Park Service realized the importance of having a better way to get across the river, and in 1921 they built the first suspension bridge, which you see here. Now this suspension bridge, you can tell just by looking at it, does it look a little flimsy? The design on this bridge, it could carry a load of one mule and one person at a time. So you didn't want to go out there when there was someone else with their livestock. You wanted to wait till they were all the way across. This bridge was so flimsy that in a strong windstorm, it would be like the old Tacoma Narrow Bridge. You've seen the movies of the Tacoma Narrow Bridge that and then fell apart. Well, there are reports that this one would turn over in a windstorm. And it was damaged at one time in a windstorm and repaired. So within a few years, the National Park Service realized and understood that, this bridge really wasn't what they needed, especially if they're going to promote tourism, if they're going to have lots of mule ride trips down there. We don't want to wait while we have one mule go across at a time. We need something more substantial. And that is what led to the design and the construction of the current bridge. We saw a photo yesterday of a Mabel Spencer crossing the bridge on a black and white horse. This may be the same Mabel Spencer, I'm not sure, but just another view of that flimsy bridge and another view of that first bridge. Some folks were pretty young when they went down there too. So the 1928 bridge was built in almost the very same place as the 1921 bridge. The abutments or the ends of the bridge were essentially at the same place, but this new bridge was 16 feet higher. So the old bridge stayed in place while they built the new bridge. And I'll just note something here. You know, on today's bridge, you go through a tunnel to enter the bridge from the south side. The 1921 bridge, there's this pathway that leads around. And the pathway on the north side left that old bridge. What's the story on the new bridge? Well, there was the tunnel that was blasted through the rock to reach here. And then there was the spiral in the trail that got you from this elevation and around up to the north elevation at the end of the bridge. So this bridge was designed and constructed with some pretty significant, civil engineers will recognize the term design controls. These are things that sort of provide boundaries on how you're able to design your bridge. This morning, many of us heard a presentation about mules. Almost every piece of this bridge is less than 10 feet long and weighs less than 200 pounds, what could be carried down on a mule. So all of those steel members that you see in the bridge meet those criteria. The only exceptions were the suspension cables above that came across like this, and then there are wind cables that stabilize the bridge like this. The wind cables, I believe, were actually pulled down. We saw a picture this morning of the mule pulling a sled, okay? That's how the wind cables got down, but they were smaller diameter. They did not weigh as much as the suspension cables. And I'll say a bit more about the suspension cables in a moment. Again, as we learned this morning, wide enough for a mule, but not wide enough for the mule to turn around and cause havoc. So everything that went down was carried by mule. This is the inner gorge, Google Earth view from the tip-off on the South Kaibab Trail. South Kaibab Trail is going down, and then it gets tighter and tighter, switchbacks, switchbacks, switchbacks. All the way down is how things needed to be carried. And many of you who have been down there have experienced that. Here's one of the design drawings from canyon wall to canyon wall on each end. The bridge is 440 feet long. The suspension cables are quite a bit longer, 550 feet long. And yes, mules did carry down everything. They were unloaded in a yard, so to speak, until the material was actually needed for construction of the bridge. But what about those 550-foot long cables, maybe about 2 inches in diameter, each cable weighing over 2,000 pounds, and there were 4 of them. They were carried down by 42 men, mostly members of the Havasupai tribe. And we should probably divert here for a moment and talk about Native American history. You know, this was part of their original homeland. We think there were Havasupai who spent at least part of the year living in Indian Garden, right here below the South Rim. As the European Americans came here and occupied the area, the Havasupais were still around. We have a long history of Havasupai tribal members living in Supai Camp here near the South Rim. There was certainly a lot of Havasupai around in 1928, and for the most part, it was them who helped to carry the cables down to the river. And I have a really neat account here. The construction engineer wrote a report following construction of the bridge. These cables were each packed down to the bridge on the backs of 42 Indians, is his account. We think it was mostly 42 Havasupai. There may have been some other non-Native Americans. Each man carried about 50 pounds and would make a round trip in 2 days. It was about 7 miles from the head of the trail to the bridge, a drop of about, he says 5,000 feet, but really it's only 4,400. The Indians carried their own food, and when they got to the bottom of the canyon, after getting rid of the cable, they went down onto a flat, gathered brush, made sort of a trench of it, and placed big boulders on the brush. Then they set fire to it, and after the fire died down, they spread their blankets over a wooden frame they had constructed, doused the rocks and live coals with water, and walked through this tunnel of blankets, getting steam baths, and then jump into the muddy Colorado. And I think that's a very interesting insight to their culture and their practices. A sort of a small view through the window about the Native Americans who lived in this area. I'm not sure, this may be a wind cable. They may have attempted to take down the larger cables this way, but as best I can tell, all 4 of the main suspension cables were carried down on the backs of men. And if, say tomorrow morning, there's 42 of you who would like to meet me out at the South Kaibab Trailhead, we can recreate that scene from 1928. We do have the good fortune of having a number of photographs on file of construction of the bridge. I will mention that this was before OSHA. This was before the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. I'm not sure how much fall protection there is there. You'll notice these are guys who are working on the tunneling. And you see in this picture they're wearing respirators. But we do know that Coconino County and the Arizona State Mine Inspector got wind of the fact early on that men were working in there without this kind of protection. And there was a letter that was sent. There's a letter on file that I've read that, you know, the Park Service got its hands slapped for having unsafe working conditions. So finally, the Black Bridge was finished. The old bridge was removed. Here's another interesting piece of insight that I think everyone in the room will appreciate in this day and age. I want you to look at this timeline. In early December, the park superintendent, Minor Tillotson, wrote to the Park Service's chief engineer something about the bridge, and I don't know exactly what. I suspect the bridge had been designed at this point, and maybe Tillotson was making a final plea saying, gee whiz, we really need this bridge. Can you help us? January 4th, the reply was, we've given a great deal of study, and we have within the last few days received an allotment of $48,000 for immediate construction. They opened the bids in February, construction began in March, and they finished on August 3rd. They didn't have to do an environmental impact statement. You know, this is lightning speed. Would you be able to do a project like this fast now? No, the answer is no. Now, this is a really interesting story. They knew they would need mules, right? They'd need mules to haul stuff down. And eventually there were a total of 42 mules. Some of them were Park Service mules. They also rented time from Fred Harvey mules to pack stuff down at some very nominal fee of 4 cents a pound or something like that. Pretty cheap in today's day and age. But I'm trying to demonstrate here that in spite of the stereotypes you have about civil engineers actually have a sense of humor. Now, Minor Tillotson, superintendent of the park, was a civil engineer. And as Helen Fairley noted this morning, the first 5 superintendents of this park were civil engineers. So Tillotson wrote this letter back to Washington, D.C. I'm sure that you and the members of the Washington office will be greatly flattered and pleased to know that the 8 mules which have just been purchased for use in the packing of bridge materials have been christened as follows: Steve, Cam, Art, Horace, Kit, Isabel, Tom, and Webb. Now, raise your hand if you know anything about early National Park Service history. Okay, and do you have some suspicions about who these mules are named after? So let's start with Steve. Who do you think Steve is? Stephen Mather. Okay, let's go down to Horace. Who is Horace? Horace Albright. Then the other names are probably more obscure, and if you don't know them, I'm not surprised. But Cam is Arno Kammer. He was associate director and would become a director of the Park Service in the future. Art Demarais would become a director in the future. And in fact, if you went on a cemetery tour in the last couple days, you know that Art Demarais is buried out here behind the Shrine of the Ages. So Kit, the chief engineer of the National Park Service. Isabella, I'm not quite sure what her real title was. Some folks have said Chief of Information Publicity. Don't know. Anyone know who was a very influential landscape architect in the National Park Service? I think I heard someone say the name. Thomas Vint. He helped design Going to the Sun Road and lots of others in national parks. And Webb was probably the guy who designed the Black Bridge. So I want to ask you a question. Each of you, I want you to think in your mind, if you had 8 new mules today, and you wanted to think of 8 people in Washington, D.C. that you would like to name them after, what names would you pick? And I would guess if in today's day and age, a Grand Canyon National Park superintendent did something like this, the reaction might not have been so nice as it was back in 1928. This was very clearly a group of people with a lot of collegiality who worked very well together and could take some kidding from time to time. And here are pictures of many of those folks that I just mentioned. Happened to find some historical photos of in their more formal attire when they were back in DC. So the bridge was completed in 1928. There's a little bit more to the story. In the 1930s, the Civilian Conservation Corps built the river trail, which provided a second route of access to get to the Black Bridge. That's an interesting story that many of you have heard about. In the mid-1960s, the so-called Silver Bridge was built across the river to carry the Trans-Canyon Pipeline, bringing water from the north rim of the canyon to the south rim of the canyon. The Black Bridge has withstood the test of time. It's been maintained from time to time to keep it functional and in good condition, and my guess is it's probably going to continue to serve our needs for a long, long time to come. So now I want to turn to sort of the other piece of the story this afternoon regarding the American Society of Civil Engineers. ASCE does have a National Historic Civil Engineering Landmark Program. And within the United States, there are about 225 civil engineering features that have been designated as historic landmarks. And some of those are no-brainers. If you're not a civil engineer, you will not be surprised that Golden Gate Bridge, Brooklyn Bridge, Washington Monument, Statue of Liberty are all National Historic Civil Engineering landmarks. As I mentioned earlier, it just so happens we've got a couple others nearby, the next crossing upstream, the next crossing downstream. And in fact, these are the plaques that you will find if you look around a little bit The Navajo Bridge is at the very west abutment by the little visitor center building that's there. Hoover Dam, it's over near the flagpoles on the Nevada side. But another really interesting and coincidental thing about this landmark program, there are now 31 of these National Historic Civil Engineering landmarks that are in units of the National Park System. And I just found that to be an amazing coincidence, and here's just a few of them. The Blue Ridge Parkway, the Going to the Sun Road in Glacier National Park, the Zion Mount Carmel Tunnel in Zion National Park. So it looks like there's a relationship here. Oh my goodness, what happened to that slide? I believe I'm now ready to turn and say a little bit about the civil engineers that were involved in this project. I believe this is a really cool photo of John Lawrence, who was the on-site construction engineer. He was on site, he was in charge of the construction. I'll mention on the design plans, there's the name of Frank Kittredge. I mentioned him already. He was the chief engineer of the National Park Service. I already mentioned that Minor Tillotson, a civil engineer, was superintendent of Grand Canyon National Park. The park also had its own park engineer at the time. And here's a photo taken sometime during construction that shows, I guess, 4 of those important names, civil engineers that were involved with the Black Bridge. And 3 of them were members of the American Society of Civil Engineers. So we are going to have a dedication ceremony at 3 o'clock. I do want to recognize 1 or 2 folks who are here with us now. We do have the national, or I should say international president of the American Society of Civil Engineers. So Robin Kemper, please stand up so we can all say hi. The American Society of Civil Engineers has about 150,000 members worldwide, and Robin has been elected by the membership to serve as president of ASCE. So thank you, Robin, for being here, especially for the dedication ceremony. And let me ask, has Lisa Carrico, is she in the room at the moment? Okay, in the back. Thank you for coming. Wave your hand again, because now people have turned around. Lisa is the deputy superintendent of the park and will also be making some remarks at our dedication ceremony here in about an hour. And let me also mention, we're actually going to have 2 landmark plaques. We're dedicating one on the rim this afternoon because you can see the bridge from the rim, and we have lots of visitors who actually come as far as the rim. We will have a second plaque down by the bridge, right there, so you can make that connection really easily. That one will be installed before too long. And while I'm speaking about installation of plaques, I certainly want to say that there have been many, many people in Grand Canyon National Park who have worked to help make this a reality. I mentioned the superintendents earlier, but there are a number of other people that I had a chance to work with. I will not have a chance to mention all the names, but Ellen Brennan from Science and Research Management was very instrumental. Chris Brothers, the head of the trail crew, has been responsible for installation, and thank you so much, especially on installation. The last 2 or 3 months, there have been some challenges they had to deal with, and I'm speaking not only of snow and cold weather, I'm speaking about things like government shutdowns. They really had their plates full, so I'm really thankful that we were able to get that accomplished. In fact, Chris Brothers and his crew got this plaque on the rim installed on Tuesday, sent me an email with a photo. Wednesday, when my wife and I arrived, the very first thing we did when we got to the park early afternoon was to go over to Havasupai and take a look at the landmark plaque. And I can't begin to describe how wonderful it was to see all of these visitors looking at the plaque, reading it, taking pictures of it, pointing down into the canyon, looking to see where the bridge was located. This will be a piece of interpretation that's very important to the park and very significant for ASCE. So I'm delighted to see it there. We covered up the plaque with black plastic on Wednesday to protect it from the snowfall. Oh, and there's one other interesting thing about the visitors who are looking at the plaque. The bottom of the plaque, there's a line there that says, dedicated February 23rd, 2019. And they were reading that line, and they were looking at their watch. Just, what day is it today? Did I miss something? So they were paying attention. So once again, dedication ceremony, 3 o'clock. You're all welcome to attend. It's about 50 yards to the east of the Havasupai Geology Museum. To get there, exit the parking lot, turn left, follow the signs to State Route 64. That means after you turn left, you'll be going straight. Go about 6/10 of a mile, turn left where the sign says Havasupai Geology Museum. There are only about 76 parking spaces over there. I don't know how many folks are planning to go. If you are thinking about going, you might want to think about maybe carpooling with someone else. It's a nice sunny day. I don't know how many visitors we have from Phoenix and elsewhere. Don't know how crowded it is out there, but that's a consideration. As I said earlier, we do have a number of other civil engineers in the room today. I know we've got the president of the Arizona section of ASCE, a number of officers and volunteers from ASCE. Thank you for coming, and we'll give you some additional recognition at our ceremony, 3 o'clock this afternoon. So unlike the formal presentations that the History Symposium does in the morning, we do have an opportunity if there's any questions from the audience. So if there are any questions, I'd be delighted to try to answer them.
Question.
Okay, and how much maintenance? Well, the popular name is Black Bridge. Now, I've seen a letter in the file where there was some correspondence going back and forth to make the decision, what color should it be? And the answer in the correspondence was Park Service green. There's a lot of the bridge that's just exposed steel, I believe. So that may be part of the reason it looks mostly black. But it just has a very dark appearance. That's the way it looks. Somehow it got that name of the Black Bridge. How much maintenance? I know a little bit about that. I believe it's been painted a number of times. I've seen some correspondence in the museum collection files. There was a story in a Phoenix newspaper pointing out that the Park Service in about 1948 was seeking bids to paint the bridge. And the story went something like, if you would like to spend your summer at the Grand Canyon, you could put in a bid to paint the bridge. And the winning bid was like $2,000 to paint the whole bridge. And I recall it being painted again in the early 2000s. It's probably been painted a number of times. The treadway on the bridge originally was sort of a cement asphalt type material to take the wear of the mule hooves. That wore out over a period of time. More recently, it's been a wooden type tread. That tread was replaced pretty recently in the last couple of years. When they replaced that tread, underneath the wood, the deck of the bridge is steel plate. There were some places where it had rusted. In fact, I'm told rusted through. So there's some patching that was done on that steel plate. I believe so the vertical lines that come down from the suspension cables are suspension wires. I believe those were replaced maybe 10 or 12 years ago. So yes, there is maintenance that's required from time to time, and like any piece of infrastructure, we have to make sure it's well maintained. It's just like your house. If you don't maintain it, it's going to fall apart after a period of time. So who's next? Yes, ma'am.
Why did you keep the old bridge since it was unsafe?
Why did...
You keep the old bridge, the original bridge.
Why did we keep it?
Yes, it was still present when you were building this one, but it was unsafe.
Well, I presume we still needed a crossing to serve visitors. It wasn't entirely unsafe. It was still serviceable. It was just very flimsy. Only one person and one stock animal could get across at a time. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm sure it was very instrumental in the construction process to have it in place. Anyone else? Yes.
Do you know how long the cactus was growing in the middle?
The question was, do I know how long the cactus was growing in the middle of the bridge? I'm not familiar with that.
That was it, at least 10 years.
Oh, we have a mule wrangler in the back. Does he know the answer to the question?
Oh, no, I was ready to ask him.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes, the question.
Oh, can you talk more about the concrete buttresses on the top?
Okay, the question was about the concrete buttresses at each end of the suspension cables. And yes, they did have to drill down. They had to create those concrete buttresses and make sure those buttresses were very integral to the rock. In other words, would not detach from the rock. And then the cables are essentially attached to the concrete buttresses. That's just the concept. Anyone else? Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and attention. And again, you're all welcome at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Thank you.